Okay. So now I'm going to have this use state hook, and I'm going to create like some to-dos. Or I'm going to have some to-do state, because we're going to want to change this. Update this state. So use state. And these ones are actually going to be objects. Now, remember with my use state, I actually, I can give it an initial state. And I'll give you this little hint too. Sometimes if you want to just really quickly like render something, let's see if this works. I'm just going to do the to-dos. I can't remember if it will show this or not, or if it breaks. Oh yeah, that's breaking. So what I'm trying to do, I just want to see those to-dos, but it's saying like, hey, objects, I'm getting this error. Objects are not valid as a React child. There's a quick little trick I like to use just to kind of like see what it looks like. I can use this because it won't render these objects. It does like a string, but if I want to like just see it, convert it to a string, that object to a string, I can do this. I can do Json.Stringify. That's just a method that's built into JavaScript, and then I can pass it, you know, this object, which currently is this to-dos. So that way I can like quickly see that array without having to like really render it. So it's just like a quick, easy way to kind of see that, see an object to a string. Now, what do you think is kind of like, as I'm making this, what's kind of a little bad about how I'm doing this? How I'm like hard coding this to-do state here?
It's too specific.
Yeah, it's once again, it's like that specific thing. Learn.js. Well, now it's like coding. It's like the Learn.js is going to be on both lists. So what I'm going to do, I mean, I could set it to an empty array. So just blank. That works too. So by default, there's not a to-do list. But what I can do is I can give the person the option to give me to-dos. Let's just call this like, call this initial to-dos. So they can give me like an initial array. ID to do. I'm going to say give them to relist another list. And maybe this one, they don't give me any to-dos. I'm going to do one other demo. Bad to-do list. So this is kind of go to what we were talking about earlier. Like, it's kind of that, what I said, like, this car expects gasoline, you better give me gasoline. Or if you don't, it's not going to behave the way it's expected. So let's look here. So someone is using this to-do list 4 different times. And let me show you this. So I'm also going to do this. Let's just do like, just for demo. I'm going to delete this in a second, but just so we can see. First, to-do ID. That's going to be to-dos 0.id. So now I'm going to get an error. Can't read properties ID of undefined. So let's do this. I'm going to show you something you might see a lot. I want to see if todos.0 is defined. So here we are checking if there is a to-do 0. If there is a to-do 0, then go ahead and show the ID. I'll just do a not so we can see the opposite. So these all have no to do at 0. Well, I pass them as props, right? Initial to-dos. So that's, I called the prop initial. So we're kind of going the back ways. We're like, so we have the to-do list. They're giving it this initial to-dos array. What I want to do, but here I'm hard coding the to-do state to this empty array. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, hey, props dot initial to do or an empty array. What this is saying, you know, if a initial to do, if a initial to do's prop was given, use that as initials, like the initial state, you know, else use the empty array. So now my coding to-do list, I can give that the initial array of to-dos. I can give my camping the initial array of to-dos, and I can go in and I can grab that first to-do.id on both of those. This one also has a to-do list, but I can't grab that to-do.id because they gave me an array of objects that does not have an ID. So this is, that would be like misuse of this component. Because as I'm designing this, like I'm expecting, if you do give me a to-do, it better have an ID on it. So does that make sense? It's kind of going back to like when we're talking about functions. I'm kind of like when I define this with like when they give me props, I'm saying, yeah, give me a name prop, you know, that should be a string. Give me this initial to-dos. That should be in an array of objects that have ID, to do, and complete. But I can also make my list work where they don't have to give me initial to-dos. Like this is fine. They can give me an initial, you know, that list, where it doesn't have that, I don't have to give it initial to-dos. Why is that? Oh, I need a refresh. And there we go. So they can give me another list and they don't have to give me anything initially. And so there's no to-do at 0. Cool. I'm going to get rid of this. This was more just kind of the demo. Sweet. So yeah, let's do our first. So this Json.Stringify is nice because it, we can see our list just quickly, but that's not how we're going to want to show that to the user, because we can't also can't really make that interactive. So what I like to do, and this is the read. I'm going to call this method render to-dos. So I want to go through an array of objects that have ID, to do, completed. And I want to transform that into an array of objects that is like JSX stuff. What method do you think I use for that? What method should be popping in your head?
Would it be map or filter?
It'd be map. That's cool. Map would be the one. So I want to go through my to-dos. I want to map. Now I give this a function that whatever it returns, it's going to plop into that new array that this map is creating. So just start with something simple. It's going to call this X so we don't get confused. I'm going to name that something. Is this going to work? X.name.
I believe not, because you haven't said what name is doing yet, right? Or well, yeah, props.name lower though. I'm actually not sure.
With how I'm using this, let's say this is the right way how I want to use this. What things would I expect to be on X? So I'm mapping over my to-dos. Here's my initial to-dos.
So
wouldn't you need like ID, to do, complete?
Yeah. X is going to be something that has it's going to be like a to-do. It's going to be one to-do. So yeah, ID, to do, and complete. So I could do like X dot to do. And then I could do something like this, maybe a div. Wraps all of this. Maybe do like a style in here that's like text decoration. So I'm going to do a text decoration, but I'm going to say, hey, does the X dot complete? I'm going to do a ternary. If that is true, was it complete? Or I should do complete. I'm going to do completed. Just because that's how we had it in our last example. So X dot completed. If that's true, I want the style to be, I believe it's strike through. If not, I just have it be an empty string.
So you're saying if it's true to change the style of the text?
Yeah, and we can look at that. Actually, well, let's actually get this rendering. So instead of doing Json Stringify to-dos, I need to render my to-dos. That's not going to render anything. So I'm going through, I'm mapping these to-dos. The map function returns in an array, but I'm not actually doing anything with that. I actually need to return that value, and I can just directly return it right here. So there's my list, learn.js by wood. I'm going to change one of these to true to see if that styling is working. It's not strike through, is it a line? Or am I spelling through wrong?
It's TH in through. You spelled.
Okay, I got it wrong, TH. Line through, what the hell is it? Strike through. Okay. Line through. CSS.
You're currently saying x.todo. Shouldn't it be x.todos?
No.
Okay.
Because X is I'm mapping over my to-dos, and remember, X is in a map function, this X is going to be the thing, like each thing in the array. So, I mean, I should call this to-do, but I'm calling it X. I think sometimes when you're learning to code, naming stuff right makes it a little confusing. So, where the hell is my text? Oh, there we go. I just had to refresh it. So there's my line through. So now if it's completed, I get some line through text. I'm also getting this error or warning. It wants a unique key prop. So I'm going to add the key to you're going to need a key when you're like mapping over something to the containing child of the return. So like the most outer div or the most outer JSX of the return in your map. So key, I'm going to do x.id. Refresh. That gets rid of that warning. Another thing with React, you need only one parent JSX element. And what I mean by that, if I have these two divs, you see how it's already yelling at me? I have two sibling divs at the root level, and it's saying I must have one parent element. So everything kind of needs to be wrapped in one containing element. That's what that means. You can actually just do like, if you don't want it to actually be an element, you can just do an empty fragment. But I don't need to do that here because I have a div kind of wrapping everything. Cool. So that would be my render method. And that's all I was asking you to do for the homework. Like if this was your homework from yesterday, this would be done, or from the weekend. That's kind of all I was wanting you to do. You have a to-do list. You really didn't even need to do it as like pass these by props, but that's kind of like a little bonus. But now I have these to-do lists. I can read my to-do lists. I really need to hurry on this one. Okay, so let's do create. I want to add a to-do list. So something we need to talk about is how to do a form. So we're going to do a really basic form in React right now. So I'm going to grab a form element. I'm going to grab just a paragraph just to have the label for it, and then I'm going to do an input. And then I'm going to do a button, type equals submit. Close that off. So now I can add, I have this to do, and let's actually give this some text. So now for each of my lists, I have a way to add an item. Well, I have a form, and I can click on here, add an item to the list. I don't know if you notice this, but when I click add, and it actually is refreshing my page. I don't want that to happen. So we'll talk about how to prevent that. So let's do that right now. So I'm going to add a handler on here on submit. So we have a click handler, like when we click a div, we can run an event. For a form, we have a on submit handler, and then we can pass it a function. So the function, I called it handle submit. So let's go ahead and define it. This actually, when I write this, I can give this on submit a function that takes one parameter. And what this is going to be, this is going to be the event itself. So I'm just logging it. So I have my form, and then I have this handle submit. So I'm going to log the event. And I can't really see it because what's happening actually, the default behavior of a submit, it's like refreshing my page. I don't want that to happen. So what I can do is I can do an e.prevent default. And call that function. I can call this E, you might see it called event. I can call this whatever. Let's call it event for now. And then I'll log the event. It is the submit event. So if I do ESDF and I click add, there's that event. It's like an on submit event. And I can use that object to not have my form reload. So eventually what I'm going to want to do is add to do. How do I grab the value from the form and then add it to my state? Well, what I need to do for React is I'm going to need some state for my form. So I'm going to call this to do and set to do. Equals use state. And I'm just going to have this be an empty string by default. Well, let's just go XXX so we can see this. I'm going to get rid of that in 1 second. But so in my form, I give it a value. I give it that to do state. So there's my XXX on all of them, but now I can't type. My input's broken. I'm clicking on this. It's not working because my state is now hard coded. This value is now hard coded. What I need to do is I need to add a on change handler to my input. So now we're seeing two new handlers. We've seen the on click, but now we have an on submit that is triggered when the button of type submit in your form is clicked. And then we have this on change.
And the on submit on change, is that React JS or that's JavaScript?
I mean, there is in HTML, there is an on submit, but yes, this is a React thing. It's kind of it is following along your normal HTML submit, but it's just the JSX version of it. And our input, so once again, it's a React thing. It has HTML has an on change, but in React, it's a on change, capital C. And I'm just going to do this for now. So whatever you want to input, you create state for that input. And you give it the value of the state. And then for the on change, you do this e.target.value. We'll spend some more time with this. I'm kind of hurrying up through this. So I just want to show this is how in our handle submit, we can log the actual to do from our form. This is what we're trying to get at. So I have a use state. I'm going to get rid of that because I just really want to default like an input to an empty string. So I have a to do and set to do that I use in my input. And this on change, like the handle submit, I can just give it the function, an anonymous function that has an event. And if I grab the e.target.value, that is actually going to be the value of my form or of the input. And then when I click add, there's the value. Cool. So now I'm ready to add to do without mutating. So const new to do's. So this is what we did earlier in class today. I want to, because I can't mutate, so I take my to do's and I go ahead and I clone them. And now I want to add a new to do. I need an ID. I just want something unique. So what I can do for now until we start working with databases is I can just grab a random number. So math.random will give me a random number. Cool. I want a to do key. Well, the to do key is going to be my to do state. And then completes. I think it makes sense that it can, if this is complete, if I'm adding this to do, it's not done. So I'm going to default that to false. So I take my new to-dos, or I take my, to create this array, I spread out over my to-dos, I copy them, I clone them, and then I add one to-do where I'm just grabbing a random ID, grabbing the form value, my form state, and complete it to false. And then I can go ahead and set to-dos to the new to-do state. All right, so now when I go in here, you know, for my coding one, I can maybe say learn Ruby. Click add, boom. And now that's on my state. For my pre-camping, I could like buy gas. Now that's on that list. Something I might want to do also as well in my form is once I've added a to do, maybe I want to clear out my to do state so my input clears out automatically. So when I click add, oh, I didn't save it. So when I click add, let's do that again. It also, it clears out that value from the input. So that is create. Questions on create? At the build out a form. For now, just kind of, we'll
Yeah,
do a
it's
lot.
confusing, but
What?
so it's a little confusing, but I guess just have to put more time into it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an extra step with what we, because what we did this morning was just like kind of this. I want to create new to-dos. I copy my original to-do state and add the one to do. Let's say we want to remove a to-do. So in my render function, I'm going to like add a button. Let's just do this. Delete. And I'm going to do an on click equals delete to do. Let's go ahead and define that const delete. do. I think a lot of times as you're doing these event handlers, just doing some logs just to see that you're making sure you're hooking these up correctly. So now I have a delete button. I click that, delete to do. So I am going to go pretty quick through the rest of this. So maybe you just want to follow along and then I'll slack this out at the end. But what do you think our delete, what do we really need with this delete to do function? Any ideas?
We wanted to delete the ones that are struck through, or do we want to delete it? Do we want it to delete any?
I wanted to delete it from the list. Like I want to, like if I click, whether it's struck through or not, I want to just remove it from my list. What do I need to know? Like, because what I want to do is I want to do my filter here. What was the thing I needed? If I want to remove a to do, I need to know which to do to remove, right? I need the ID or some way to identify which thing I need to remove. And that's why we have the ID. And that's why it needs to be unique. So I'm expecting this function to get past the ID. Is this going to work if I just log ID? Any ideas what this is going to log?
Would it be undefined?
Yes, that's exactly what it would be, undefined. Because I'm not passing it anything. Where is it not delete to do? Why is it logging the event? Oh, that's a little tricky. By default, yeah, it's logging the event, the click event. But I actually want this to not do the ID, the event. I want it to be the ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pass this function the ID. So what I do is on each button, so remember, this is my render to-dos. And as I go through each to-do, which I'm calling X, I'm going to add a button and I'm going to call the delete to do function, but I'm going to pass it the ID. Now I don't want this to run right away because it would delete all my IDs. So I want this to wait until that's clicked. So I do it in an anonymous function. Now that I pass it the ID there, it logs the ID. And we can see like the math.random gives me like a random decimal number. But that should work. So cool. Now I have the ID. Now I can do the filter method that we did earlier today. So I can do filtered to-dos. So I'm going to take my to-do state and I'm going to filter. I'm just going to call this X again. So remember this function, if it returns true, it's going to keep the thing in this filter to-dos array. If it doesn't return true, then it's not going to put it in this filter to-do arrays. So remember, X is the current to-do. So I want to check, hey, does that X.ID, does it equal the ID that was clicked? Or wait, sorry, if it does not equal. So as long as the current to-do that I'm looking at, which I'm calling X, as long as that ID does not match the ID that was passed to this function, i.e. the ID that I put here on the delete, then keep it. And then I can set my to-dos to be the filter to-dos. Of these. So now when I click delete, it finds that ID, it matches the ID, and it doesn't keep it in that array. And now my delete is done. Sweet.
So is that kind of similar to a backspace?
No,
No.
this is because remember my to-dos isn't an array. It's removing that item. So what it's doing, it removes that from my to-dos. And remember the set method, the set to-dos is going to trigger my thing to my function to re-render. And then when I re-render my to-dos, we're going to go through my to-do state. We're going to map it. It's going to be gone from that next state. So it's removing it from my state. That's, yeah, so it's quite a big, I mean, it's like a backspace in that it's like, well, it's not like a backspace because I don't have to delete the last thing. Like I can delete any one of these. I'm going to delete coast of, it can delete that specific one. Let's do another button. I'm just going to call this, let's just do it on the to-do on this paragraph. I'm going to do an on. Wait, no, that's on my form. Sorry. I want to do it right here in this like where I'm rendering, where I'm mapping over my to-dos. I'm going to do a on click. I'm going to just call this toggle to do. Now this is going to be like my delete where I need to pass it the ID of the to do to toggle. Cool. And just to show you, let's just like look at my code. Now I'm getting an error toggle to do is not defined because now I'm calling this function toggle to do, or I'm trying to use this function. It's not defined. I need to do this toggle. Call this what is this? What is this going to be?
Is that a Boolean?
No, not a
No.
Boolean. If I did like type of, what is this? Console.log that. I need to do a console.log.
They're going to be an object.
No, it's not an object. It's closer though. What am I passing to this function? When I'm actually, so here's my function definition. Here's where it's going to get called. And when I actually call it, I pass it x.id. What is the type of x.id? Well, what is
A
x?
number?
Yeah, X is coming from my to-do. So X is really just a to-do. So that's going to be a number. So when I click on one of this, there's my number. Well, what number should it be? That should be like the ID of the to-do to update. So I'm going to call that. Instead of calling like, what is this? That's a horrible name. I should just call it what it is. It's the ID. It is the ID of thing to do to toggle. Bad name, but it's saying what it is. Okay, so let's do our map function. So const updated to-dos, because this one I want to map. I want to go over my to-dos and I want to map over. I'll name this one correctly. So I'll actually call this, instead of calling it X, I'll call this to-do. So I'm going to go through each of my to-dos. So if my to-do.id, if that equals the ID of to do to toggle. Or I guess this should be ID of to do. Yeah. Clicked. Let's call this clicked. This is, so if the to-do ID equals the ID of the to-do click, this is the one I want to update. So this one I'm going to return, I'm going to spread out over the to-do. I'm going to just take all of that state and I'm going to change the completed to be not to-do dot completed. If they don't match, I can just, I don't want to change the to-do. I can just return it as is. And then here I can set my to-dos. Once that's finally done mapping all over all of the to-dos, it'll return into the updated to-dos, which then I can use to set the to-dos. It's a mouthful. But now when I click on these, they now toggle. Delete them. I can read them. I can update them and create them. And that is CRUD actions on our to-do list. Let me slack this out because I went fast through that. I'll also push it up to GitHub. Commit. So you, it's a little late. I'm just going to stop it right here. I need to hop onto a meeting anyway. I'm already way late for that. Your homework is going to be pretty much just in line with what we talked about today. So you will have an opportunity to really go through this with your homework. And we're going to be doing what's called like the CRUD actions. We're going to get a lot of, we're going to do this a lot, especially like when we get into Rails, we're going to be doing CRUD with Rails. So it's a lot, but really try to understand what like the map's doing, what the filtering's doing. And I think that the to-do list is probably, you know, it's a good way to kind of go through the like CRUD actions. How are you feeling about it? Dead quiet. That means you're burned out.
That was really fast. but-
Yeah, at first I was kind of understanding it,
It
especially
was speed of light.
and then once we started to React, it kind of got a little hard from there. But I understood what you were doing earlier at the beginning part, but then yeah, once you got to React, it kind of started getting tougher.
I got like 90% of that.
That's good. I would expect like 50% or 20. But we'll go through it. That's your homework is I might just have you just do the to-do. I might change it up like a reading list or something just to make it a little different, but your homework's going to be pretty much this. So you'll have time to go through the video, pause it, go through the notes, go through the code. So yeah. Let's go ahead. Let's take lunch. Let's come back at 2:15. And yeah,
Okay, sounds good.
cool. Have a good one.